it was off.
Oh, I thought you had this dialed in there, Art.
I thought I did. Well, I muted it when you started complaining about your foot, and I wanted to go live before
Okay,
you got in. Okay, so if you're still watching, so Andrew's foot, he's had a foot injury, and so he was complaining about his foot injury, and I didn't want it to be all over the show, so
but now it is.
well, it's okay.
But now it is. Now
We had to
everybody
give an
knows about
explanation, so
my shitty ass foot. So, anyways, yeah, thanks for telling us. We're just talking about this David Harvey interview, and and this from this kind of more liberal kind of interviewer. But I mean, generally, I mean, I really like what Harvey says most of the time. In aspects of, just because geography was my major. I'm interested in urban geography, and as far as what ending commodification of like healthcare and you know housing and stuff. I mean, like I said, those are expansive debates, and he's got a whole bunch of YouTube, his all the channels and stuff, because it's kind of like those Trotskyist demands where at the end where they just list a whole bunch of things, but they don't give you a way to get there. And so, I mean, that has to be outlined more clearly, and he covers that a little bit more in some of his other talks and stuff. But I mean, what do you think? I mean, that kind of thing is kind of a because everybody supposedly on the left says free healthcare and housing and stuff like that, but nobody has a plan on how to implement those kind of steps.
right.
So I mean, and that's an important discussion. I mean, I think Harvey deals with that a little bit more, and he writes quite a bit on urban development and that sort of things. And I mean, geography is his specialty, and when he talks about those kind of things, he talks more further in depth in other interviews and books. But I haven't heard. I didn't really catch all that he said on that in this interview. Could you recap what he actually said?
Yeah, so just recapping, and this is really quick recap, is I know he says that he thinks that there's a need for a movement, and it should be centered around like the decommodification of healthcare, of housing, and of food. And those three things in particular. And I might be missing one. He might have said one more thing, but he also mentions that there is a need for like a party. He doesn't really explain that very well. And of course, he says that he's against the idea of a third party, which he gets criticized for in the comments. And then the other thing is he gets asked about what would Marx do in such a situation? What would Marx advocate for today? And he said that Marx would basically advocate for a party, for a party organization, but he doesn't really go into a lot of specifics on that.
Yeah, because he also says, because his, it's a different time and nobody can exactly predict what
right
he would have said. Because I mean, of course, his views changed. You can see the maturity of his writing and their views over the years. From the initial Communist Manifesto to this far more complex ideas involving capital and what it would lead to later on and stuff. So, I mean, yeah, I think I kind of didn't like that headline. Is like, well, what Marx would do, and that's kind of a comment I've heard on like a debate from like some on Facebook these days, and
Right.
especially from a lot of people that don't understand. They're like, well, Marx just said we got to do this and there'd be a utopia. I'm like, no, Marx didn't say that. He just what he basically focused on is like, nobody can predict the exact future after the revolution, but under the capitalist mode of production, you can guarantee this and this and this will happen, which it has. Same with Lenin. It's exactly,
Right.
capitalism's doing exactly what they both said it would. So
hey Andrew, would you mind if we go back just to that previous article, since I potatoed out and I muted, kept it muted.
yeah, okay.
So we could just recap that real quick, and I'll try to be quick. So earlier we were talking about this Xinjiang article, and I totally potatoed out and forgot to unmute the mic, our audio. But basically, Andrew and we were talking about this, and this is on MR Online. It's being shared on Reddit, and basically, it's originally published from Transnational Foundation of Peace and Future Research, but it's basically it's a criticism of a report by what appears to be like bourgeois think tanks, and so which concludes that what's happening in Xinjiang is genocide. And I became immediately suspicious because if you look at the bottom, and I incorrectly thought that this was like the sources, but this is like an appendix of like reference material. But I looked at the appendix, and so I thought, oh well, I looked at their appendix, and it's like, well, there's a bunch of like basically Wu Mao, Chinese propagandists, like state propagandists on here, as well as like the Chao Collective, which is this Chinese nationalist group, and the Gray Zone, which is run by Ben Norton and Max Blumenthal, which has taken the side of the military in Myanmar. And so I saw these kind of shady links here at the bottom, and I thought that was the sources, and I became suspicious of the article, as well as the people that were sharing this article, who have a very pro-China view. MR Online itself has historically had a very, very, very pro-China view on things, on everything, as it was Maoist. And but anyway, we were looking at this, and this criticism basically is more of a criticism of the think tanks itself than a criticism of the actual report, the facts and whatnot of the report. So without actually looking at the report itself, it's difficult for me to say whether the report is worth anything. But we were talking about like the point of this article, and it's like based on a lot of ad hominem and like appeals to authority, in that basically these right-wing think tanks are all run by scumbags, so who cares what they have to say. But the point is like that nothing's happening or what this criticism is saying is that nothing's really happening in Xinjiang worth writing home about, and they're so like, and the only people that are spreading who are basically saying that there's a crisis happening in Xinjiang are these right-wing think tanks, and that's basically the impression they're trying to leave you. That's bullshit. And I think Andrew and we both kind of agree on that, right?
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to quickly summarize this. A bunch of these kinds of articles and reports are being shared around. And I know, like, I've replied to a couple people that have posted this, and they didn't like the idea that I was, picking it apart. So,
Really?
yeah. And of course, they had like no response to my criticisms of the sources at the bottom. So, anyway, and then expanding on that, I think I was actually kicked off of, the Marxist internet discussion group on Facebook recently. So, and I'm pretty sure that's because, because I haven't towed the whole Xinjiang China line.
Yeah.
But moving on, I wanted to get that out of the way quickly because we tried to cover it earlier and I potatoed out. But moving on, maximum and minimum, the minimum maximum program by Donald Parkinson. Parkinson's one of the editors, if not the editor, of Cosmonaut. I haven't even heard of anybody else call themselves editors, so I'm just going to say that Donald Parkinson's the editor, and he can correct me. This is pretty interesting. It's on the program of the Party Over, and as kind of an example to look at Marx's view of the minimum and maximum program. And then it's contrasted, of course, with the Trotsky's ideas on a program, which like with transitional demands and such, and this is sparked a little bit of discussion. It's a lot of the discussion that I've seen is on Facebook. It's not on Reddit or on YouTube. But basically, and just trying to summarize what Donald is trying to say, is that he's taking a look at Marx's views on the minimum and maximum program as kind of like a framework to create like more programs, and he's saying that these minimum the minimum program, the minimum demands are like much more revolutionary than whereas the maximum demands are like, well, we want the whole pie, we want communism and classless society and take over the state. And so like these really big demands, the minimum demands would be more like steps to get there, like the concrete steps to get there. Now, and I think that's the gist of what Donald is saying, but he's saying that they're a lot more like revolutionary than just your typical like we want a $15 minimum wage, and so these are like basically revolutionary demands. Like he uses the example of abolishing a standing army as one of the demands.
Okay, so before you go on first, do you think Donald is describing what Marx said accurately?
I think I think some of what he's saying seems to be accurate.
Yeah.
I mean, now, so what he's saying Marx says seems to be accurate. Donald's like further analysis of that, like, like of what Marx says is his own opinion, of course.
Yeah.
And it's important to recognize that, like, and that's with everybody, like, right? Everybody says Marx or Lenin or Trotsky or so-and-so says this, therefore this. But like, you have to be able to differentiate the facts and the opinions.
Yeah.
And anyway, I mean, I thought it was a pretty interesting article. It's might be a little ambitious. But it's definitely sparked some discussion. I know that that Frank Arango of the CVO, Communist Voice Organization, he's basically responded to this on Facebook to Donald Parkinson on Facebook, and basically said that, hey, look, like abolishing a standing army is not exactly a revolutionary demand. Like, look at like Switzerland, like it's been done before. And then he's made like more of the argument that, hey, like it depends on like what is the revolutionary organization behind it? What are they willing to do? You know, how are they supporting these demands? And that's really like critical here. It's not so much as the demands itself. And so Donald Parkinson's like trying to have this debate with Left Voice, and this is kind of a response to Left Voice's article on transitional demands, because there's this within the Marxist community, there's been this ongoing debate forever between minimum and maximum.
What's Left Voice?
So Left Voice is the leftvoice.org.
Yeah.
And they're a Trotskyist group. But there's been this ongoing debate on minimum and maximum demands and the transitional demands, and basically like which one's better, right? And Frank Arango has been basically like, look, you're not gonna win this argument with Left Voice, because you're essentially saying that the minimum demands are basically like revolutionary demands, but they're not necessarily revolutionary. And really the key is like, well, what kind of support are you going to provide those demands? Like he brings up like the idea that there's these organizations with pamphlets and leaflets and propaganda and such speakers that help to take one from, you know, give me more bread to let's take over the state.
Yeah.
You know, to make that leap, because it's not so much a big leap there. Yeah. And that small demands are important, and I kind of have to agree with Frank that small demands are important, and that it's important to have a revolutionary organization and revolutionaries who can help to bridge those connections. It's not so much rooted in the demands themselves as being this magical formula to build a revolution.
Yeah, it's having the proper organization and the people behind it to support those demands.
Yeah.
To be able to make them come to fruition, I guess.
So like,
so I guess we'll keep an eye on that. I mean, there probably is going to be a little back and forth on this.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, because I saw Donald hasn't responded yet to Frank's comment on that article.
No, he hasn't.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be one coming.
Yeah, so so the next thing I want to talk about is this this idea of a criticism of anarchism, and a modern criticism of anarchism, the great Marxists versus anarchists debate that is ongoing, and whether there needs to be more criticisms and analysis of Marxism and anarchists by each community. And so on Cosmonaut, someone writes in a letter that yes, there needs to be a new Marxist criticism of anarchism that extends beyond like beyond on authority and state and revolution. And there's a counter letter that basically says, I think it's by an anarchist, that says, hey, that's a great idea. It should definitely be done. My own take is, there's been a lot of these debates in the past. A lot.
Yeah,
like for over 100 years.
To Marx, with back.
Right. Like back. Here in, so I live in Everett, Washington, and here in Everett, there was a really famous debate, and it was, it was between Emma Goldman, I think, and the editor of the local socialist newspaper, who was a big fan of Eugene Debs, and that was done at the Everett Theater, I think, the historic Everett Theater, which is the oldest theater. And I mean, like, not movie theater, but theater, west of the Mississippi. So these debates been going on for like 100 years now, and as well as analysis and counter analysis, and at some point, like, I think it's important to take a step back and think, well, what is being achieved by doing this? Like how is this a step forward? I don't think that question is often raised.
So I guess my question then, like, since there's this debate, do you think there needs to be more cooperation and more between the anarchists and Marxists? Since there is like kind of a discussion going on.
Well, I think.
I mean, is that the point of having debates, that is to try and build a little more connection and a little more like common, fighting the common enemy sort of thing?
It would really depend on the energy for that kind of debate. Like,
well, because I guess that's what I'm leaning to is like, well, then, why are we having these debates if we're not kind of trying to get on the same page? It's how is that different than, let's say, like debating like Democrats or something?
Well, well, here's the thing. Like, to me, it's not worth having a analysis of anarchism at this time, like a new Marxist analysis at this time. And for one, it's been done before. And I'm not saying that it was great analysis or anything, but I'm saying it has been done or attempted multiple times over the last 100 years. But but I think right now, for the Marxist community, there is not even an analysis of what is going on in the Marxist community, where it's at, like how it's composed, who's in it. There's not even cooperation, like a high level of cooperation within the Marxist community. So what's the point of analyzing the anarchist community and that trend in ideology when you haven't even analyzed your own trend in ideology?
Yeah.
And where it's been, where it is now, where it's going, and that's like a big part of doing the show, right? Is because I think we need to have an analysis of what's going on within the Marxist community
before we start critiquing
the anarchists.
The anarchists,
right?
Which you have said in the past seem to have their shit a little bit more together than Marxists do.
Yeah,
in some respects.
And like, yeah, I might have some disagreements with the anarchists about the state, even some things like maturity and stuff, but you know, and I used to be an anarchist, but it's like my perspective is that in looking at that, it's like, okay, so what can be achieved by pointing like the flaws, like of oh, well, the anarchists don't want to take the state. What's going to be achieved by that in the near term and in the long term by me pointing that out? I don't think very much, you know, at least not at this time. Like if the working class is really interested in that question, then yeah, maybe it's worth talking about it. You know, if it becomes a mass question, but I don't think it's a mass question right now. I think it's like it's a fairly obscure question.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah. So I think when it becomes an important question to answer, yeah, it should be answered. When the masses are like, hey, is anarchism worth anything? You know, should we invest our time in it? Yeah, maybe I should write more to that, or maybe someone else should. Maybe there should be an analysis. But it's like, for now, I think what's more important is like, well, the house is on fire behind me.
Yeah.
And I can figure out how to put that fire out and figure out what caused the fire so it doesn't start up again and all that. Or I can look on, you know, like on the other side of the city, there's a house that's being flooded over there, and I can point out that their house is being flooded while my own house is on fire. And it's like, to me, that doesn't make any sense. You know?
Yeah.
And so
right now,
I'm not saying that
it's pointless, because all you're really doing is like trying to, you know, since his house is being flooded, try and build a long, arduous canal across the city to put your house out.
Right.
It's on fire that would have been burnt to the ground by the time that happens. By the time you're done digging the canal.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big issues that I see is a lot of people within the Marxist community, they don't see that something's deeply wrong with the Marxist community as it is. You know, and they have like no intention to fix it because they don't see something deeply wrong.
Yeah.
So anyway, so yeah, like I have some criticisms of the anarchists and anarchism, but to me right now, like me, you know, voicing those criticisms and opinions, it's really not going to get me very far. It's not going to, like, nobody really wants to listen to that.
Yeah.
You know, like,
I mean, yeah, fine if these guys want to, you know, have a little discussion between themselves, but if they're trying to work, you know, reach the working masses, yeah.
Yeah.
People are gonna be like, huh?
Yeah, I mean, maybe they think that they're going to get very far. I personally think it's kind of it's not what's important right now.
Yeah, okay. And so any other points on those letters?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have.
Yeah, I just like to recap. My foot's in massive pain for all you who are going to watch this later and need somebody to blame for Art not turning on the audio again.
Yeah, and I apologize for completely potatoing out and